It baffles me. I really can't explain it. That route, the Alaska Highway route through the Yukon and into Alaska, has been flown by thousands of aircraft. The U.S. military have had hundreds of crashes in northern Canada. Certainly during the war with the ferrying of 8,000 aircraft through here, it was almost a daily occurrence. But in this case, it was after the war, and there's 44 people missing. An American aircraft full of American people has disappeared over the central Yukon. You just wonder, how could something that big not be found yet?
This is it, the actual plane. A U.S. Air Force Douglas Skymaster, number 2469. This Skymaster was flying non-stop from Anchorage, Alaska to Great Falls, Montana on January 26, 1950. It had more than enough fuel for the 8-hour trip. There was a crew of 8, led by Flight Commander Kyle McMichael. In fact, the massive winter search for the Skymaster was named after him, Operation Mike. Seated in the cabin behind McMichael and his crew, 36 passengers, including a pregnant woman traveling with her 19-month-old toddler. Almost all the rest were servicemen.
Mother was in Texas, and guys came with caps under the arms to her door, and she knew immediately, you know, that he was gone. Of course, Mother was pregnant with me. Daddy was lost in January, and I was born in May. Carolyn was just 5, and Janice was 2. I've heard people say all my life, you don't miss something you never had. But I've missed my father all my life. I would love to have known him, and I would have been his baby girl. I just really wonder what my life and my sisters' and Mother's would have been like if Daddy had lived. To just have something to bury beside my mother. That's what I would like to have for her. That's, you know, she never got any closure.
It was supposed to be an entirely routine journey, ferrying everyone home to the lower 48 states along the Northwest staging route, literally a highway through the sky.
All the air traffic to Alaska for the Second World War flew that route. And it continued after the war, and that route is actually still going strong. Over the years, there's lots of people coming to grief on it. Hello, Kamloops, Jerry Whitley in Whitehorse with Cessna 172, Foxtrot X-ray, Juliet, and I'd like to follow the flight plan. Those are my aviator glasses.
They do look like aviator glasses.
And I tell people when they get nervous about flying that I can see through clouds with these glasses. So there was a C-54, like a 4-engine DC-3, and it was set up for passenger transport. They flew over Northway and they were more or less on time within a minute or two. They were flying at 200 miles an hour at the right altitude, everything was fine. They were at 10,000 feet. They flew over Snag and reported to Snag radio that they were on time, but they reported clouds and they reported ice and some turbulence. And their next station to talk to, which had been less than half an hour later, would have been Ajax. And they didn't report Ajax. I think the people at Ajax, when they didn't report in, they already started to suspect something was going on. And these radio stations had some way of communicating with each other. So the word started spreading on the network and ended up going to Anchorage.
Jerry Whitley took up the search for the Skymaster after reading about the story online. As the head of CASERA, the Yukon's Civil Air Search and Rescue Association, he revived the investigation by using it as a training tool for his spotters.
No, we don't normally search flying quite this slow, but the faster you're going, the harder it is to search, to look at the ground, because it's going by ever faster.
The plan was that every year they'd cover a little bit more territory, all the way from Whitehorse west to the Alaskan border. They'd go looking for the Skymaster.
So the first thing we do is put a mark on the map where this yellow tag is. This is the last known position. And that's probably the most important thing that the search coordinator can know is, where do we know for sure they were? So for search purposes, you take this and say, okay, they're somewhere between here and here.
The maximum altitude for the Skymaster was 10,000 feet. They couldn't fly any higher with a plane full of people because the cabin wasn't pressurized.
The mountains here along their route are up to roughly 7,000 feet. So they couldn't go any lower. So my operational theory for training the spotters, as the ice coats the airplane, basically the stall speed goes up. You hit moderate turbulence and the wing drops or goes up or something, and a wing will stall. When it stalls, it doesn't recover. The plane turned on their back, going down, nose down like this, and crashed like this. If they fell into the trees or into a bit of a hole in the ground, all the fuel would burn, and then it snowed, and then the search airplanes come over, nothing to see.
I've often thought, my God, I think it would be scarier as a low-time pilot to be flying these high-speed airplanes, bad weather, remote wilderness. Not all of them have great visibility. You've got these bulletproof, thick canopies around you. You're hurtling along at 200 or 300 miles an hour in remote, strange country, primitive air nav, and it's something that generally takes a lot of practice to get good at it. I think that's scarier than facing the enemy.
The Yukon government has a database of plane crashes in the Yukon, and I think there's about 500 planes from, almost the time of the First World War right up until 2000. Some of them would be military, and many of them would not be military. The reality is the Yukon is a really large territory with vast, vast areas of the territory that have got no road access. It's conceivable that there are any number of wrecks out there that have not been properly documented. We certainly know there's one, the C-54, and people have spent a lot of time, especially in 1950, spent a lot of time looking for it.
So this is very, very clearly a runway.
We're at the south end of the decommissioned Snag airstrip, and in terms of the search for the missing C-54 Skymaster, this is really ground zero. There's lots of theories about where that plane may have gone missing, but the one thing we know for sure is that the last point of contact with that plane was here at the Snag airstrip. So this whole area would have been quite denuded of vegetation at the time.
So this is a foundation wall, essentially.
Yeah, this is a building berm or foundation wall. Sort of less vegetation in there. Here's the building wall here, and there's the other building wall there.
So I'm at the corner.
Yeah. It looks like it's 35 feet long by 12 feet wide. So I don't know what building that would match up with, but this is clearly a former building location. But what's remarkable is that there's no bits of glass or ceramics or anything. That somebody did a very good job tidying up.
Well, I was 22 when I was there in Snag. I'm probably the only guy alive now that was there at the time. I wrote home to my mother every week just to keep in touch, and she wrote back. And after she passed away, we discovered she'd saved all the letters.
Snag Radio Range, Yukon Territory, January 30, 1950. Dear folks, well, as you no doubt heard, this has been a rather busy week for us up here. As you no doubt know, Snag has been in the news this past week as the station which last contacted a U.S. Air Force C-54, which was traveling from Anchorage to Great Falls with 44 people on board.
Military planes started searching for the Skymaster the night it disappeared, just as heavy snow was falling across the Yukon. Within days, there were Canadian and U.S. search aircraft covering the flight path from Snag all the way down to southern British Columbia. It made headlines across North America.
It was as big as anything that had happened for the Air Force. And it's just not something that should have happened. Because this was a routine transport flight. No enemy aircraft, no anything. And these were people that everybody knew. They all served together in Alaska.
The surprising thing is so few people know about the C-54 Skymaster that, it was one of the most significant search and rescue operations ever carried out in North America. Thousands of soldiers or people were involved looking for the plane, hundreds of aircraft.
Joyce was born in Maharashtra, India. And what year was that, Jean?
1927 she was born.
Joyce is my father's younger sister.
2 years younger.
2 years younger.
That was part of our life growing up, knowing about Joyce going missing. We just hope that one day they will find her. They will find the plane. So we all have closure. Joyce used to work in Delhi as a telephone operator, but she actually was a typewriter first. Robert was a sergeant. In Delhi, he was the Air Transport Command. That's when he met Joyce.
I've gone through the hysterics and cried myself silly. My wife was 7 months pregnant, and because her health was not good in the Alaskan climate, she was going to Colorado to have her baby there. I was at the field to see her and Victor off. My last words to Joyce were, "If you have to jump, give the baby to Sergeant Roy Jones." She said she would.
He got all his maps and he went straight out searching for her. And they went out on the plains with the other crew that was searching.
When I heard the plane was missing, I got emergency leave. I arrived in Whitehorse Saturday. On Sunday morning, I boarded the first search plane to leave the base. We were out for about 9 hours. During the flight, we landed at Snag, where the plane last made radio contact. I made a point of talking to the radio operators there who had received the report.
The husband of the wife that was on board that was pregnant came up and thought he could help out, be another pair of eyes on one of the search planes, but there were so many search planes.
And some of those search planes were having trouble staying in the air. Conditions were terrible, especially for pilots with little northern experience.
We got another scare tonight, too. When all the search aircraft reported in tonight at Whitehorse, one was missing, and they'd found that it had not contacted anyone since leaving Whitehorse at 9 this morning. It's beginning to look like flying in this country isn't doing so good just now.
In all, 4 planes went down looking for the Skymaster. This one had 9 people on board when it descended into a valley and was flying too slow to climb out. It just ran out of sky. Miraculously, no one was killed in this crash or in the other 3 wrecks that happened during the search.
I've never seen anything like this. This is... How many times have you been out here?
I've only been out here a couple times, yeah. First time I came here, some sheep came out of it. And there was about 4, I think, came out of there. They looked like they'd been around there for a while, too.
Mm-hmm.
So... I've done some flying around over the years, and, you know, you'd think the instruments would tell them that they're not heading right, but maybe try to bypass something. And you may not use your readings then. He was down in the valley. His compass not going to do him any good, is it? He's going to have to do it by eye. The other aircraft may have decided to do something like that themselves. And the ice fields are within about 60 to 100 kilometers from Snag, and that only takes a few minutes to put yourself into those big mountains. There you can disappear. You can absolutely disappear in the ice field. It's so big.
In spite of the plane crashes, the search ground on. The weather had gotten brutally cold. On some days, the aircraft simply wouldn't start. Calls were coming into the headquarters about strange radio signals, and a few people reported hearing a crash. But nobody found anything.
It's really important to remember that 1950 is really only 50 years after the Klondike Gold Rush. Lots of Indigenous people, First Nation people living very traditional lives. So it would seem like it's an empty landscape, but in fact there were lots of people out there, widely scattered. So that really compounds the mystery of what happened to that plane. Big plane like that going by in January and crashing, you'd think somebody, if not then, subsequently would have come across this plane.
Nearly 3 weeks after the Skymaster went missing, a man from Burwash Landing named Albert Isaac came in from his trapline to file a report with the RCMP. Isaac told the police that he had heard a noise like thunder near Gladstone Creek, and that on the next day, he saw a massive snowslide with several scavenger birds roosting in the trees. The police flew out and circled the area Isaac told them about. They saw nothing that looked like a plane crash site, so they went home. Case closed.
Grandpa Albert was raised up down there through to Ashak Way, but he lived all through this country. If you know something on this land, on this water, you just don't sit and say nothing about it. You go and let people know. Their word was who they were. But at that time, non-Native people, they didn't see the First Nations word and value. Instead of flying, they should have let First Nations people go out on snowshoes. They would have had a better chance of covering the area than on a plane. These were the best of the best of the best hunters. These were the ones that could follow any kind of track, any kind of country.
At the time we're talking about, there was the Operation Sweetbrier. Massive war rehearsal. World War II was only 5 years gone. Cold War was on the horizon. So there was this need for a big war game between the Canadians and the Americans. And again, Whitehorse was central to it. They had anti-aircraft guns on the airport. I remember seeing those both ends of the runway.
Brier was a big deal that had taken years of planning. 5,200 troops with nearly 1,000 vehicles and 100 aircraft. They were spread out across the southern Yukon in the same area where the Skymaster went missing. The whole exercise was to prepare for cold weather warfare against the Soviet Union. The problem was that Brier and the weeks of preparation leading up to the exercise was noisy and disruptive. When Yukoners spotted smoke or flares from the war games, they called them in, thinking they'd found the Skymaster. It was getting to the middle of February. The Skymaster had been missing since January 26th. Things were looking bad for the 44 people on board and the United States Air Force. And then things got worse. Valentine's Day, 1950. A giant Convair B-36 bomber took off from Fairbanks, Alaska, on a Cold War training run, bound for its home base in Texas. The B-36 was carrying an atomic bomb. There was no plutonium core, but it was still a top-secret, extremely sensitive weapon. So it was shocking when the pilot reported that 3 of his engines were on fire, and the crew was dumping the bomb and detonating it with conventional explosives.
But the plane was still not staying in the air. It was slowly losing altitude. And so their next step was to try and get closer to the coast where the crew could bail out. They accomplished that much. The understanding is that they put it on autopilot to go out to sea and crash somewhere in the Pacific Ocean.
But it didn't do that?
No, it didn't. From all the information we determined, they actually the aircraft gained altitude after the crew bailed out. There's some people speculate that one crew member did stay behind to fly the aircraft, but we don't know that for sure. I don't think that was ever proven.
In 1997, Doug Davidge was part of a team that responded to a report. Somehow the B-36 had crashed on a northern British Columbia mountain, and there were concerns the nuclear payload might still be on board. It wasn't. The crew had indeed jettisoned the Fat Boy bomb over the Gulf of Alaska. But what amazed Doug was how much of the B-36 was still there after all those years.
When the search was on for the C-54, a lot of aircraft were involved, and then eventually, they weren't finding anything, and the B-36 accident, I think, drew a lot of those aircraft and U.S. Air Force resources, to another search to try and find the crew of the B-36.
In other words, the B-36 crash ended the search for the Skymaster. The headquarters in Whitehorse was closed down within days, and the officers writing the accident report recommended that they resume the search after the snow melted in the spring. But that didn't happen. They never went back at all. The U.S. Air Force moved on, and then people started to forget about those 44 people out there, somewhere, missing. Talk about the Skymaster went quiet for decades. But the Casera volunteers in Whitehorse haven't forgotten about Flight 2469.
It's serious business. This is an airplane missing with 44 people on board. There are family members from those missing people that are really interested in this, and we have to keep that in mind when we're searching. And our approach all along, once we reviewed the search that have been happening in the past and all the various theories that are out there, is that there has not been a standardized, rational search approach applied. There is no question that the effort they put into the search was massive. Many, many aircraft, many, many hours, many, many men. But they knew nothing about searching. What they're doing is not going to work. They were not using trained spotters, which of course they didn't have. They knew how to fight wars. They knew logistics. They could move a lot of aircraft, a lot of men. But how to find something on the ground methodically, they did not. They just threw more and more at it. Use a bigger airplane. Put more people on the search without looking at how you might actually find something. We use trained spotters. We use search patterns. The pilots have to know them, the navigators have to know them. We use a methodical approach. What is the most likely place for the aircraft to be down? You start with the most likely first.
We'll head just a little bit off to the right here.
At an airstrip a few hours north of Whitehorse, Dave Downing and his Casera team are hoping to fly search grids over part of the Skymaster's flight path.
We used to have a portable whiteboard. Okay, everybody, this is excellent. We're 4 minutes early. Since when has that ever happened?
It happens all the time.
It happens all the time. We've heard this before, but I'll go through it again because we will be doing it. It's maybe the first time you've seen some of the search area on the map and stuff. We wanted to have 2 aircraft fly crews out of Brayburn. From Brayburn, we can reach the eastern end of the Operation Mike search area. Run search patterns at low level, seeing what we could find. And particularly one of the aircraft is going to fly a potential northern cutting the corner flight route that hasn't been searched yet.
The problem with planning a search in the Yukon is the Yukon. It's not just the terrain and sheer size of the territory, it's also the weather. The summer of 2020 was cold and wet. And on the weekend that Casera had planned to continue their search for the Skymaster, the clouds were just too low to safely get airplanes off the ground. All of these members are volunteers who have jobs and lives. It's difficult to organize getting them all together for a search. This weekend was their one chance, and they can't fly.
You can control everything but the weather. We waited a year, and now we can't do it because of the weather. And I was sad, more than disappointed that we couldn't get out there and do this. It has become personal. I almost feel like I knew them. What if that was my parents? What if that was somebody I knew? And these people are still out there after 70 years. These are families that are missing their loved ones. And if we can find one small clue
That's all we need. It'll lead us to the big picture. I want everyone to know about it. I talk about it all the time because if we're quiet, it's going to get forgotten. I'm not going to let that happen.
As you were growing up, do you remember becoming aware of what happened to your dad?
I really became aware of it when I was around 12. My mother decided she was going to redo all the picture albums. So she covered our table with all these pictures, and that's when I started looking at all the pictures from this time. And it really dawned on me that here was my dad, and then I became really aware of it. And I remember asking my mother, what would you do if Dad came back? And she said, well, that would be awkward. Well, I mean, to never find anything. So in my mind, I'm like, well, did he just lose his memory and he's somewhere else and he just doesn't know that he has family over here? You know, you go through all of these different scenarios because you don't really have any closure at all. My mother was actually in what's called the PX, and someone came up to her and said, oh, did you hear that that plane crashed? And my mother was like shocked, of course, because she knew that my father was on the plane and the other person talking to her did not. So that was how she found out what had happened to my father. And then it was just a waiting game for her, as you know. The search party had problems because the weather was really bad. That was really hard for her, I think, very hard. She was 24 years old and she had a 3-year-old and she's pregnant all by herself in Alaska.
Just past Snag, along the northwest staging route, lies Wellesley Lake. It's big and deep and has been the subject of persistent rumors of a large plane resting on the bottom. Doug Davidge did an underwater survey of Wellesley Lake years ago, but now he's back with updated equipment. An experienced searcher will tell you that the best place to start looking is the last known location of whatever you're trying to find. If the aircraft isn't anywhere on land, maybe it's in here. And if it is in Wellesley Lake, it wouldn't be the first time Doug found a sunken airplane.
So this is in another lake on another day a few years ago, but this is what, if there's a plane in the lake, this is what we should be seeing?
Yeah, this is a good example of a full-size aircraft, twin-engine Bristol freighter that disappeared through the ice in 1969 in Baker Lake, not far from Whitehorse. We had some good knowledge or intelligence of whereabouts in the lake the plane could be. So we started surveying it, and within a very short time, we discovered its location. It sank after running into trouble landing on rotten ice, and landing gear broke through the ice, and they tried to retrieve it safely, but it was you know, a no-win situation. Sometimes the story just gets lost in time and resurfaces again. When I first started to realize that this was a real story, of course, that's where I became more interested, is that, yeah, there's all the families of those that are missing. And their wish to find this wreck. So far, over the 3 days in the areas that we've searched, we haven't seen any suitable targets, anything identifiable as a part of an aircraft or an entire aircraft. So nothing found.
The Yukon, for all its beauty, is a land of wreckage. Ever since the gold rush, people have come and gone, leaving behind their debris. And almost right from the time they first arrived, aircraft started crashing. Stories about early Yukon aviation underline the precarious and dangerous business of flying in the North, and helps explain why there's over 500 aircraft wrecks in the Yukon. Why do you think the Skymaster just persists to be missing?
I really can't explain it. Because in the years since 1950, every square foot of the country's been crisscrossed by aerial surveys, game surveys, geologists, prospectors, hikers, crisscrossed by airplanes on charters and sched routes and so on. Why nothing has been spotted, I don't know.
Do you think it'll ever be found?
I don't know if it'll ever be found in my lifetime. We know there's global warming, there's ice receding. That may lead to it showing up. You just wonder, how could something that big not be found yet?
If it was simply somewhere sitting out on the landscape, the Skymaster crash site would look a lot like this wreck, another American plane that went down in 1961.
Its placement doesn't totally make sense with the engine laying here and, you know, the other one there. This has to be the left wing because of this coving shape here. That's sort of that angle. And the no step.
Bob Cameron's son Kyle and Kyle's wife Sarah are also airplane wreck hunters.
What you're looking at is what the pilot would be looking at. And what I'm looking at is what I would be looking at if I was outside the airplane.
It's like a door frame, you know? The airplane is obviously kind of an old warhorse. These are repairs. Same kind of repair we do. This would be the same type of construction as the Skymaster, so similar amount of aluminum that we'd be looking for when we're looking for the Skymaster.
This was a Fairchild C-119 flying boxcar. It took off from Whitehorse with one of the brake drums seized. Friction made the wheel red hot, and when the pilot retracted the landing gear, the intense heat set the fuselage on fire.
By the time they realized they were on fire and they turned around to head back, and the captain gave the order to bail out. 5 people got out of it. Of those, only 3 lived. And the other 5 on board, the airplane came apart before they got out. They died here in this wreckage. The last time I was here was 2010, and I took in, I guided the son of a man who lost his life here. He was from the eastern states and really didn't understand anything about what had happened to his father, and didn't know his dad. But yeah, it's pretty heavy actually thinking about that.
It does bring closure to families, and for that reason, it's amazing to be searching still for this airplane that needs to be found for those 44 families. But there's something keeping us and those who have searched for it for so many years before us from finding it that easily.
It is sort of an abstract thought I have, but, you know, matter cannot be created or destroyed. Matter exists. That airplane is made of refined materials. They went through the Douglas factory. They served some time, and now they're disappeared. That thing still exists somewhere. What's here is out there. That Skymaster's there on a mountain, in a lake, in a glacier. You know, there's some place, if we knew where it was, we could put our hand on it.
The thing that's most unique is that I had 2 relatives aboard the plane that didn't know each other. My mother's brother, Junior, was aboard the plane, and my father's first cousin, Bill Matheny, was aboard the plane. Junior Moore was from Pennsylvania, and Bill Matheny was from Tennessee. We lost 2 members of the family in that plane crash. I was born in October of 1949. And my uncle obviously passed away in January of 1950. So I didn't know him. My brother, who was 2 years older than me, didn't know him. So everything we learned about him, we learned from my mother and my aunts and uncles. One of the reasons he was coming back was to stop in Michigan and see my brother and I. I was in Alaska a couple of years ago. You had several different excursions you could opt to go on, and one was a flight in a small plane into the Yukon, Whitehorse. And the people we were with were considering it. We were with 2 other couples. But I opted out pretty quickly. I said, the story for my family has been bizarre enough, and I didn't want to become part of it. I cannot, for the life of me, understand why the search would not have been taken up again in the spring or later in the summer when all the snow is gone, and have a real good look. I don't understand that.
If you look back at the whole period, I don't think there's much upside for the forces of either country to raise this period of time again. What's their upside for communicating this story, which was broken equipment, missing airplanes, lost strategic bomber? This is a period of history that I think the forces would rather forget.
But the relatives of the Skymaster passengers are still in the dark. They know little more now than they knew in 1950, when Barbara Stockton's mom, Marjorie, pregnant with Barbara, wrote a letter home from Alaska.
As of now, there's still nothing to tell about Frank. He's just gone. They have a big search out, but the weather hasn't been good, and that's been such a disadvantage. As for me, I'm just waiting and praying. I just don't see how I can give him up. He's so dear to me. I'm just praying that God will spare his life for me, Frankie, and the baby to be. Love always, Margie. Now, my mother said she was home at the time that this would have happened. And she said that all of a sudden, she felt like she was on fire. And she said, I looked in the mirror and I was just red. So in her mind, he had died in a fire. That's what she felt. She felt the plane had crashed and burned. So I guess in my mind, I thought, well, that's certainly a possibility.
Although they don't quite say it in the report, basically Operation Mike, it was a survivor search. In early February, they called the search off because there was no chance of survivors. And the official government agencies just don't go back. But I think the biggest thing is that we should never forget. We search until they're found. As a Yukoner, it's something that has to get done.
Bob suffered a lot, and he was traumatized, losing his whole family, his wife, his son, his unborn child. And what do? You keep on searching. They're still loved ones.
After Joyce, he went out every year searching for her. He had lots of maps. He never, ever gave up his search for her. He was devastated not only for Joyce and the baby, but for the whole crew on the plane. They were all under his command. And, you know, for him to lose the whole 44 passengers, he died in 1968.
I suppose a thank you would be good for the people in Yukon for searching for all these years and the effort they put into it.
Yes. And not giving up hope.
You think that the government would have done more because there were service people on board, but to just give up, it's it's not really the American thing, is it?
The U.S. military has a unit dedicated to going back and recovering the remains of soldiers who went missing in action. They've worked on sites from both World Wars, Korea, and Vietnam. But the Skymaster went missing in North America as the Cold War and Korea were ramping up. It's as if it fell between the cracks. A domestic tragedy, not a loss during wartime. It's almost as if it didn't count.
Take another look. That's all we're asking at the present time. Take another look. Here they are out there someplace, and somebody just needs to go out and take a look and look at it. And it's a sad occasion when you can't get someone to come out and look for 44 people.
You got to be prepared to walk. You got to make sure that you're going to be prepared to cover that kind of country and to know where you're going. Just know that you're in an area that maybe has a spirit of the person that you're looking for. You may not ever find it in your lifetime, but I would say that that person that they're looking for, if their spirit left from here at this place, then they left in a beautiful place.